Over 1,400 peer-reviewed clinical studies, proven to strengthen the failing heart, reduce blood pressure, prevent cardiac death. The evidence has been sitting in scientific journals since the 1980s, and almost no cardiologist has ever mentioned it to you. It isn't a pill. It isn't patented. It can't be owned. It's a small thorned tree that grows on the edges of fields that your great-grandmother probably knew by name. This is the story of Hawthorn, and why the most studied heart plant in history somehow never made it into your doctor's office. Let's start with what the science actually says. Welcome to Echoes Beneath Earth. In 2008, a large-scale European clinical trial called SPICE, the Survival and Prognosis Investigation of Crataegus Extract in Congestive Heart Failure, enrolled over 2,600 patients across multiple countries. All of them had chronic heart failure. All of them were already on standard pharmaceutical treatment. Half received a standardized Hawthorn extract alongside their medication, half did not. The researchers tracked them for years. Here's what the data showed. Patients on Hawthorn extract showed measurable improvements in exercise tolerance, reduced fatigue, reduced shortness of breath. In a specific subgroup, patients with a higher ejection fraction, meaning their hearts were less severely damaged, Hawthorn significantly reduced the risk of sudden cardiac death. One trial, 2,600 patients, a measurable reduction in cardiac death, and you have almost certainly never heard of it. This was not a fringe study. It was published in the European Journal of Heart Failure. It was conducted by cardiologists at major research hospitals. It followed rigorous methodology. And then, almost nothing happened. No major pharmaceutical adoption, no mainstream medical guideline update, no prime-time news segment. Something didn't add up. To understand how that happens, how something real gets quietly set aside, you have to go back much further than 2008, back to a physician named Dr. Green. His full name was Dr. Jennings Green, a general practitioner working in County Clare, Ireland in the late 1800s. He had a reputation in the local villages for treating heart conditions, particularly in elderly patients with what he called failing action of the heart. Irregular pulse, swelling in the legs, breathlessness after climbing stairs. Standard medicine of the era had little to offer. Digitalis, a powerful drug derived from foxglove, was available, but it was toxic at the wrong dose. One calculation error and the medicine killed the patient. Dr. Green was using something else. His daughter later described his method, a tincture prepared from the berries of the common hawthorn, Crataegus monogyna, the small thorned tree that grew in every hedgerow surrounding the farm fields of Clare. He guarded the formula closely, treated it almost like a trade secret. His patients improved dramatically by the accounts of the time. Word spread. Physicians from across Ireland began to ask questions. After his death, the formula was released, published, and for a brief moment, Hawthorn entered the mainstream of Western medicine. Then, everything changed. Dr. Green did not discover Hawthorn, he rediscovered it. Because the story of this plant and the human heart is as old as recorded medicine itself. In ancient China, over 1,000 years ago, physicians of the Tang dynasty were prescribing Hawthorn, called shanjia, for what they described as stagnation of the heart. Stagnation, a word they used for poor circulation, sluggish blood, congestion in the chest. Modern cardiologists would recognize that description immediately. It is congestive heart failure. Hawthorn appears in the Chinese pharmacopoeia continuously from the 7th century to the present day. It was never forgotten there. It was never abandoned. In ancient Greece, Dioscorides, the 1st century physician whose herbal encyclopedia remained the medical standard for over 1,500 years, documented Hawthorn. Not for the heart specifically, for the stomach, for digestion, but he noted its power. In medieval Europe, Hawthorn was a staple of monastic medicine. The monks who maintained the great herb gardens of the 12th and 13th centuries grew it alongside valerian and elderberry, The abbess Hildegard of Bingen, one of the most important medical writers of the medieval period, described hawthorn as a plant that strengthens what is weakened in the body's core. She was writing in 1150. She did not have a stethoscope, she had no blood pressure monitor, but she was describing, in the language available to her, what modern cardiologists now confirm in randomized controlled trials. Same plant, same effect, 12 centuries apart. The Native American Ojibwe used hawthorn bark in tea for heart complaints. Indigenous healers in the Andes used related Crataegus species for the same purpose. Across cultures with no contact, no shared language, no shared religion, the same plant, the same organ, the same result. That is not coincidence. That is a signal. So what is actually happening inside the body when you take hawthorn? Here's the short version, no jargon required. Your heart is a pump. Like any pump, it depends on pressure, flow, and the condition of the pipes. Most cardiac disease at its root is a problem with one of those three things. The pump weakens, the pipes narrow, the pressure climbs too high. Hawthorn works on all three. The plant contains compounds called oligomeric proanthocyanidins, or OPCs, and flavonoids. Think of them as molecular keys. When they enter the bloodstream, they do something specific and measurable. They relax the walls of blood vessels. They dilate the arteries. They allow more blood to flow with less resistance. That is exactly what the most commonly prescribed heart medications, ACE inhibitors, calcium channel blockers, also try to do, through different mechanisms at significant cost with documented side effects. Hawthorn does it naturally and gently. But there is more. The compounds in hawthorn also directly strengthen the contraction of the heart muscle itself, called a positive inotropic effect. The heart doesn't just pump into less resistance, it pumps more efficiently, more completely. And then there's the third mechanism, arguably the most important. Hawthorn has been shown to reduce the electrical instability in the heart, the kind of instability that produces arrhythmia, the kind that, in vulnerable patients, leads to sudden cardiac death. A 2003 systematic review published in the Cochrane database, the gold standard for medical evidence, analyzed 13 clinical trials on hawthorn for heart failure. The conclusion? Meaningful improvement in exercise tolerance, significant reduction in symptoms, no serious adverse effects recorded. 13 trials, consistent results, no serious side effects. For reference, a new pharmaceutical drug typically requires 2 pivotal trials to receive FDA approval. It commonly produces a documented list of adverse effects. It is then widely prescribed. 13 trials and silence. Here is where the story becomes less about a plant and more about a system. The pharmaceutical industry operates on a specific economic logic. It is not sinister, it is structural. To bring a drug to market, a company must spend between $1 billion and $3 billion on clinical trials, regulatory approval, and safety studies. That investment is protected by a patent. For 20 years, they own the molecule. They charge what the market will bear. They recover their investment. That is the model. Hawthorn cannot be patented. It is a plant. It has been growing wild across Europe, Asia, and North America for millions of years. No company can own it. No company can charge a proprietary price for it. Anyone can grow it. Anyone can prepare it. The berries cost almost nothing. And so, no company will spend $3 billion to prove it works. The spice trial, the large European study we mentioned, was funded not by a pharmaceutical giant, but a German herbal medicine company called Wilmar Schwabe. A small firm, a fraction of the resources available to a Pfizer or a Novartis. Their trial was rigorous, their data was real. But the machinery that moves a compound from clinical trial to medical guideline to physician prescription pad, that machinery runs on pharmaceutical money, on lobbying, on sales representatives, on sponsored continuing education for doctors, on journal advertising. Hawthorn has none of that. It has 1,400 studies. It has 12 centuries of consistent traditional use across multiple civilizations. It has a Cochrane review. It has a large European trial showing reduction in cardiac death in a key patient subgroup. What it does not have is a patent holder with the incentive to spend the money required to get it into clinical guidelines. That is not a conspiracy. That is an economic fact, and the result is the same either way. In Germany, where a different regulatory framework exists, one that recognizes traditional plant medicines alongside pharmaceutical ones, Hawthorn extract is an approved, prescribed medicine. German physicians prescribe it. It is reimbursed by national health insurance. It sits on pharmacy shelves next to beta blockers and statins. In the United States and United Kingdom, it is a supplement, unregulated, unstudied in the clinical mainstream, available in health food stores beside the vitamin C. Same plant, same evidence, different country, completely different status. That tells you everything you need to know about why the evidence was buried. It was not buried by a person. It was buried by a structure, by a system that, through no deliberate malice, has no mechanism for turning unpatentable evidence into clinical action. The knowledge exists. It sits in peer-reviewed journals that anyone can access. But knowledge without an economic driver does not move through the medical system. It sits still. It waits. They didn't forget. It was buried.
Let's come back to Dr. Green. Standing in a field in Clare in 1890, he did not have access to randomized controlled trials. He did not know about oligomeric proanthocyanidins. He did not understand the molecular mechanism by which a berry could slow a racing heart. But he watched. He observed what happened to his patients. He kept notes. He had the thing that 12 centuries of traditional healers also had, direct feedback from human bodies. Time. Repetition. Accumulated evidence that did not come from a lab, but was evidence nonetheless. And what he observed, what Hildegard of Bingen observed, what the Tang dynasty physicians observed, what the Ojibwe medicine keepers observed, has now been confirmed repeatedly by the most sophisticated clinical research apparatus in human history. They were right. They were right before we had the language to say why. There is something deeply unsettling about that, about the realization that for centuries human beings were successfully treating heart failure, one of the leading causes of death in the modern world, with a plant that grew freely on the edges of their fields. And that somewhere in the transition from that world to this one, the knowledge was separated from the practice. The evidence was separated from the prescription pad. And people died in that gap. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of catastrophe, just quietly. The way things are lost, not by fire, but by paperwork, by economics, by the slow erosion of anything that cannot be owned. There are 64 million people living with heart failure worldwide right now. Many of them are on medications that partially work, that come with side effects, that they cannot always afford, that they take every day for the rest of their lives. And in the hedgerows of Ireland, in the parks of Germany, in the edges of fields across the entire northern hemisphere, a small thorned tree is flowering in May, red berries forming in autumn, quietly doing what it has always done. The spice trial results have been available since 2008. The Cochrane review has been available since 2003. Hildegard of Bingen wrote about it in 1150. The Tang physicians wrote about it in the 7th century. Somewhere between then and now, we built a system so sophisticated, so expensive, so specialized, that it can only recognize what it can own. And everything else, no matter how much evidence it carries, falls through the cracks. This is not the story of one plant. It is the story of what we decide counts as knowledge, and who gets to make that decision. The Hawthorn is still there. The studies are still there. The question is whether we are willing to look. The answer has always been growing on the edge of the field. If this reached you, share it with someone's heart you are trying to protect. The research in this video is publicly available and linked below. Read it yourself.
take it to your doctor. Ask questions. The knowledge belongs to everyone.